Hello and welcome to episode 22 of CJI Unpacked. And today we're going to talk about the Child Sexual Exploitation Follow-up Review. I'm Jackie Durkin, Chief Inspector of Criminal Justice Inspection Northern Ireland. And I'm joined today by Detective Superintendent Jordan Piper from the PSNI and Dr. Roisin Devlin, who was the lead inspector for CJI on this follow-up review. So you're both very welcome. So what we thought we'd start off by was talking to you, Roisin, about what the follow-up review found and how we've assessed the recommendations.
The follow-up review looked at the recommendations from the full inspection, which took place in 2020. That had two strategic recommendations, and they were really about improving how the system responded to child sexual exploitation and also how it understood the nature and scale of the challenge and how to tackle it. And we also made 7 operational recommendations, and they were directed to the different agencies, mostly to the PSNI, but also PPS, courts, youth justice. And we did find progress had been made since the full inspection. What stood out was the individuals that we spoke to, how dedicated and committed they were to tackling child sexual exploitation. Another positive was actually the understanding the nature and scale of child sexual exploitation had improved somewhat. And we also saw beneficial multi-agency training. But there were still gaps. Children were still at risk, and we found that there was a need for more data. So how well were children being protected? That picture still wasn't well understood. There was a need for long-term indicators and monitoring, and we didn't see a child-first approach in all of the responses to concerns that were being reported to police. By that we mean just seeing that the voice of the child was reflected and ensuring the child was put at the centre of that.
So one of the parts of the follow-up review, one of the ways that we gathered evidence was through the case file review.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that, who was involved in that and what we found?
The follow-up review field work was carried out along with a full inspection that looked at the response to child criminal exploitation. And for that inspection, a team from His Majesty Inspector of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Service joined CJI inspectors to undertake a review of a number of files. So that included children who had been reported missing, as well as some children who had been identified at risk of child sexual exploitation. And we also looked at a number of prosecution files. So that's where the investigation file had been passed from police to prosecutors. We were looking for the initial response, the information that was considered, and how risk was assessed. In relation to missing children, we could see examples where perhaps that wasn't as child focused as it should have been, and times where the language used was victim blaming, and that is something that we were able to look at in terms of training, that being addressed through training. But a question we had was then, how well was the training working?
Jordan, I'm going to bring you in now, and first of all, thank you to you and your team for the work that you're doing, because we know that it's really difficult and complex work. But can you sort of explain, what does child sexual exploitation mean in Northern Ireland today?
Okay, thanks, Jackie, and thank you for having me today. So we work from the definition of child sexual exploitation, which is a form of child sexual abuse where an individual or group takes advantage of an imbalance of power to coerce, manipulate, or deceive a child under 18 into sexual activity. So this can happen to all children. It can happen in person, online, or both, and it often involves an exchange, whether that's perceived or real, for something the child needs or wants. But essentially what we're talking about is perpetrators who will target children who are vulnerable because they're children or may have additional vulnerabilities as well. Unfortunately, it is something that's happening in our communities, and it happens to children who live at home and children who are care experienced as well.
And some of the children that you deal with, I imagine, as you said, the vulnerabilities, but they can also have challenging and complex issues going on in their lives, whether they've been in care or they are in care. So how do you and your officers work with those children when maybe they're not keen to report or disclose what's happened to them?
Our response to CSE is done in partnership with Health and Social Care Trust. So our CSE officers work within each trust area with the CSE social worker. So we work together to find out exactly what the child needs in terms of support and to try and understand what's happened to them. So we'll do a risk assessment that's done between the detective constable and the social worker, and that enables us to identify whether the child is at risk of CSE. And then we look at that individual child's response, and that's when you talk about child focused and child centered. It's based on each individual child, what their needs are, and we look to safeguard the child and to investigate any offences.
Okay, so I want to talk about perpetrators as well, obviously, and the challenges of identifying perpetrators. Can you tell us a bit about that and the work that's going on, obviously without identifying any individual, but the work that's going on to do that?
Yes, so perpetrators come from all walks of life and society, and we again work with partners to try and disrupt perpetrators. So we can do that in a number of ways. So probably the way you would think of is arrest, and hopefully charge and convict. That we can also apply for civil orders. We can give a warning to someone who may have been found in the company of a child, which then that's called a child abduction warning notice. So we can give that notice, and then if they're found in company of that child again, we can look to make an arrest for child abduction, and we can look at other ways with partners in which we can disrupt any potential offending. And we have a person of concern assessment process where we will flag individuals who we believe are perpetrators of child sexual abuse.
So I think we all know that it's underreported. Child sexual exploitation is underreported. So in terms of the preventative work that you and your officers are able to do, what sort of activity does that involve, and how successful do you think it's been to date?
And again, that's something that we do in partnership, because sometimes if it comes to the attention of the police, it has happened, or it's at the further end of the scale. So we try really hard in relation to early intervention. So that can be education and raising awareness. So we do that through partners. PSNI are a member of the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland. I chair the Child Exploitation Committee under the Safeguarding Board, and under the CE committee, we develop our partnership response. So we have, and it's not just around raising awareness with young people. So we've done that with local businesses, hotels, for example, where we know sometimes children are unfortunately taken to and then sexually abused. So it's just that raising awareness within the community with different partners and with the public as well.
So Roisin, the cross-departmental and the importance of partnership working was one thing that we highlighted in the original report and in this follow-up review. So what did you find as lead inspector when you were looking at those recommendations related to good partnerships?
There had been an improvement in the multi-agency approach to tackling child sexual exploitation. So that there had been a group formed called the Child Protection Senior Officials Group, and a subgroup of that had looked at the 2020 inspection and its recommendations and how the multi-agency aspects of those could be taken forward, and that was positive. What we found was a gap, was the long-term monitoring of that. So we didn't find goals or targets set in relation to tackling child sexual exploitation and measures to monitor that over time. And that's something we would like to see, because it's really important to know, is child sexual exploitation being eradicated? Are children being supported? And are the disruption tools that are in place working as they are supposed to work? We had also asked for a problem profile, which would be police-led, as it should be, but involves input from partners. So again, that is a multi-agency piece of work. And we know that was led through the Child Exploitation Committee of the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland. And it was positive. We could see that that had improved over time, but still a way to go in terms of improving that partnership input and monitoring it in the long term.
So is it fair to say that at the most senior levels across government, when we're looking at the children, young persons strategy, and we're looking at the programme for government and priorities on safer communities and ending violence against women and girls, and we know that, you know, obviously boys are involved in child sexual exploitation as well, but do you think enough's being done to make senior officials aware of exactly what's happening, not just about the quantity, but the quality of what's going on to tackle child sexual exploitation in Northern Ireland?
There is a lot of work to tackle child sexual exploitation, and we know that from the inspection, but the quality of that needs checked, and that is a responsibility for the agencies and organisations carrying out that work, to understand how well investigations progress, how well missing children are responded to. But there is a role strategically for those responsible to understand if that is working, and to adjust if need be. So if there are less investigations than expected, less prosecutions than would be expected, or if there are barriers to that, that there is a knowledge of that strategically. And that is where the gap is, because without those longer term measures and indicators, that information wasn't being reported through or being, I guess, challenged strategically, and definitely is an area for improvement. And it is an area where leaders are willing to look at and engage in, but it's definitely an area for development. Now, there are cross-departmental groups, like the Child Protection Senior Official Group, which has now been renamed. But in order for justice and criminal justice to feed into that, it's important for the Department of Justice to understand what's going on amongst its criminal justice partners. So one of the things we did ask was whether there was an opportunity for the Department of Justice to meet with the criminal justice partners and get a good understanding of what's happening on the ground. So that is something we understand will be looked at, so that Department of Justice is more informed strategically before it feeds into those wider groups.
So that evaluation and impact piece and knowing exactly what the outcomes are,
Yeah,
needs to feed into that. So Jordan, I want to ask you, so obviously a lot of in this follow-up review, there were quite a few recommendations that were assessed as partially achieved. Maybe an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Did that feel fair? Did that feel about right to you?
Well, I don't think that's an unfair question. Yeah, do you know what? It probably did. It's not what obviously we were hoping for, because the team worked really, really hard every day, in a really difficult area of work. But I think having read the report and the recommendations, I understand why that outcome was given, and we welcome the feedback and the opportunity to learn from the recommendations, and also highlight the good work we're doing, like we are doing today.
Yeah, and resources are something. Your team's resources are obviously something that was highlighted in the report, and I commented on in the commentary as well. So, I mean, are things looking any better now than they were at the time of fieldwork?
So we are in a really difficult position with resourcing. Our Chief Constable has been very open with that in relation to resourcing and budgets. We are in the new year, there will be more of an investment in resourcing across Public Protection Branch, which will, we look at our branch resourcing in its entirety, so it will start to have some positive impacts. But either that could be slow, but we're moving in the right direction.
And in terms of the challenges that brings for you and your team in the meantime, who are doing such good work and trying to keep children safe and to obviously track down and investigate perpetrators, what does that mean for you in balancing those priorities?
It is difficult because we need to think about the resilience and the well-being of our officers and balance that against dealing with the demand and the threat, risk and harm and the vulnerability of the people that we work with across Public Protection Branch. So that is a challenge. Like I say, the team do a really, really good job in very difficult circumstances.
Yeah. I want to ask you as well, and we talked about in the report about a child first response, and what does that mean for you and for your team?
So this is about putting the child first and at the centre of the investigation, understanding the child's needs. And for me, it's also about involving them in the decision making wherever possible in relation to the investigation, and just making them the focus of everything. So that might be that we do a video recorded interview to achieve best evidence, or it might be that we arrange to get a statement from a place that suits them rather than a place that might be more convenient to us, and allowing the child to advocate for themselves wherever possible so that they are involved. And you'd mentioned also earlier around outcomes for children. So it's really important that we do articulate where we have had positive outcomes for children and how the work that we do is translated into that. And as you've said, we're looking at reporting mechanisms. We're working with the Department of Justice to do that and our other safeguarding partners. And all of that for me comes back into that child-centred response. You mentioned earlier on as well around use of appropriate language, and that's really important as well, because children are not putting themselves at risk. Children are being exploited by perpetrators who seek to sexually abuse them, and that's just a really good example around how we change our language. Not using the term looked after children because children in care don't like that's abbreviated to LAC, and that's some feedback that we've had. So it's that kind of understanding of that terminology. So it's care experienced children or children in care.
And then you mentioned about sharing the group of different organisations that are involved in trying to tackle child sexual exploitation. So can you say a little bit about the challenges and the benefits of that group?
So there are challenges. We all have competing demands in terms of resourcing. Everybody's very, very busy, and sometimes just coming together. It does highlight those things. PSNI is a regional service. The Health and Social Care Trusts are trust based, so they're not regional. So sometimes, you're having to balance a regional service working with non-regional services, but everybody's well represented across the Child Exploitation Committee. You mentioned the partnership problem profile, which one of my analysts worked really, really hard on, and we did come out with a good profile, but it could be better, and some of that is us understanding as a partnership what data would really help, what when we've gathered that, how can we analyse it and what does it show us, and again that comes back to child-centred and better outcomes for children. And then what the benefits, it's just really nice working with a group of people who are all really positive about safeguarding children, and what we do is done in partnership to try and achieve that goal, and then there's a really sort of good sort of peer support between the different agencies, and peer support in relation to different problems and trying to work through them together. So yes, we talk about systemic issues, so we work through them together.
And is there anything in terms of a member of the public or a family member or somebody who's working with young people who suspects there's a potential issue? I mean, what are the sorts of things you think we should be looking out for and to encourage people to come forward and raise a concern with the PSNI?
I would say, just thinking back to the definition at the beginning, then anything with any concerns around a child, so a change in behaviour, possibly going missing from home, new friendship group, something signs where a child just doesn't seem quite right. And schools have a really important role to play in this because they have children a lot of the time. So I think anything that's a child's acting out of character, teenagers can be difficult, but when it's more than, just what, we were all like growing up, to where there's some real concerns, then we would encourage any information to be reported into us so that we can make an assessment, and we can do that with partners.
Roisin, what do we want to see happen next? Because obviously this is such a critical issue. We're likely to return to this in the future.
Yeah. What we would really like to see is that child-centered approach reset, particularly in the response to missing children. I think Jordan talked about the importance of language, and it's important that that is child-focused and the voice of the child is represented in how concerns about children are responded to, and an improvement in the strategic oversight and accountability, so that if PSNI teams are struggling with resource, there is an awareness of that. Collectively, are there adjustments that can be made? Does it mean certain targets aren't going to be met and different measures need to be put in place? That is something we think can be improved, and we know is being worked on at the moment.
Okay. So can I thank you both for participating in the podcast today? And Jordan, particularly to you and your team, thank them for all the work that they're doing. It's so important, and it's difficult for inspectors to work on a review like this or an inspection like this. So that's compared to what you are doing every day. We're always mindful of that and making sure that you're looked after as well and taken care of. So this is our last podcast episode of the year. Hope that you'll listen to our previous episodes that we recorded in 2025, and we look forward to further episodes in 2026.